Now, our first presentation is going to be done by Professor Lynn Loo on building partnership and creating opportunities towards net zero shipping. Now, Prof Lynn Loo is the Chief Executive Officer of the Global Center for Maritime Decarbonization, a not-for-profit organization based in Singapore to help sectors accelerate its decarbonization efforts through shaping standards, deploying solution, financing projects, and also fostering collaborations across sectors. Now, before GCMD, she was the director of Endlinger Center for Energy and the Environment, where she commissioned the Net Zero America study that has provided unprecedented temporal and geographic granularity on transition pathways. Now, she also founded the Princeton E-Affiliates Partnership, a flagship corporate partner program to engage industries and also to launch Princeton's very first executive program in partnership with the World Economic Forum to contextualize the complexities of energy transition for business leaders. In addition as well, Prof. Loo is the co-founder of Enluca Technologies, and very recently, she received the 2020 Thomas Edison Patent Award from the NJ Council of Research and Development. Congrats on the awards. And she's also a young global leader with the World Economic Youth and a fellow at the American Physical Society and Materials Research Society. What an amazing portfolio, ladies and gentlemen. Am I right? I'm very excited to be inspired by her presentation. And if you're ready for her, please help me put your hands together to welcome Prof. Lynn Loo on stage for the presentation. Don't forget, you can submit your questions as well after her presentation.
I'm going to take this off as well so I can speak and you can hear me. Good afternoon, everybody. And good afternoon, Senior Minister Tut. It's a pleasure to be here today. Thank you to the conference organizers for the invitation and the opportunity to speak with you. As the Masters of Ceremony said, my name is Lynn Loo, and I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the Global Center for Maritime Decarbonization, or GCMD. GCMD is an NGO that's newly founded, about 2 months old. And so I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce to you GCMD and to tell you about the efforts that we've undertaken at GCMD, and last but not least, to share with you what I think is a very, very exciting announcement later on in my talk. So GCMD was founded with a singular mission, and that mission is to help the maritime industry eliminate its greenhouse gas emissions through shaping standards, deploying solutions, financing projects, and fostering collaboration across sectors. Just to contextualize who we are and how we got started, I wanted to show you this timeline. So shipping contributes about 3% of the global carbon emissions annually. And that may sound like a small number, but if you believe in the projection that shipping volume is going to triple by mid-century, this number is going to balloon pretty quickly. And it's for that reason that the International Maritime Organization has set forth targets for eliminating or reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And so for those of you who are not familiar, the 2050 target basically calls the industry to halve its carbon emissions relative to the 2008 standards by 2050. And now if you look at nations and corporations that have declared net zero carbon goals by the same period, this may not seem very ambitious, but it is, because of the challenge and the complexities that are associated with this decarbonization process, and the pathway for shipping getting there is not clear. And so it's within that context that the Singapore Maritime Forum, supported by MPA, had convened a group, and this is the International Advisory Panel for Maritime Decarbonization last year, to look at charting these pathways for the industry and to think about actions that can be taken, especially in Singapore, to accelerate our decarbonization agenda. And so this panel consists of 30+ stakeholders, including ship owners, ship operators, experts from classification societies, from engine makers, from battery makers, And then there are a few of us academics that are part of this panel. And so this panel is really to think about the pathways towards decarbonization and the actions that can be taken. The group met 3 or 4 times over the course of 6 months to discuss, and we came up with 9 recommendations, of which one is to form a center to coordinate regional efforts with global outreach. And so that report was submitted to the government earlier this year in April. And then Transport Minister Ong Ye Kung had announced that Singapore is supportive of forming the center. And in that same week, during Singapore Maritime Week, 6 key industry players stepped up along with MPA to become founders of this center. And 4 months later, we've been formally incorporated. This is in August. And so that ribbon cutting ceremony has Kwa Lei Hoon as being part of that group, as well as Billy representing BW Group, Cyril Ducal from Eastern Pacific Shipping, as well as Rajpal Bhatti from BHP. And so that was last month. And in the month that's interim, we've assembled a team. We've spoken to countless stakeholders, and we've strategized and come up with a strategy on how we should move forward, and that's what I'd like to share with you. Just again, to contextualize who we are, I wanted to share with you who our founders are. So in addition to MPA, we've got a diverse group of founders, a mining company in BHP, ship owners in BW, Eastern Pacific Shipping, and Ocean Network Express, the foundation of a classification society in DNV, as well as a shipyard in Sembcorp Marine. So this is a very diverse group of stakeholders that have come together to support this idea of forming a decarbonization center in Singapore. And what I've shown you to your right is a map. This was a satellite map, a snapshot that was taken on October 6th, so 2 days ago, to show you the maritime traffic. Sorry about that. And to contextualize where the other maritime decarbonization centers are. You can see that there are a few decarbonization centers or like-minded organizations in Europe. They include the Global Maritime Forum. And then, of course, closer to us are the Maersk McKinney Moller Zero Carbon Shipping Center, as well as the Lloyd's Registered Decarbonization Hub. So the Maersk Center and Lloyd's Registered Decarbonization Hub are organizations that bear the names of the companies that fund them. And so it's not surprising, and strategically, that GCMD is founded, and it's in Singapore, given the importance of the maritime industry to Singapore, given that Singapore is the largest bunkering hub and the second largest cargo terminal. And so this is a way for us to then coordinate regional efforts with a global outreach. So backed by these founders and with MPA, we are uniquely positioned. We're uniquely positioned to tackle some of the most challenging problems in this sector and to commission some of the most comprehensive projects and trials, if you will, in what is one of the most important maritime hubs in the world. So we can add value, and we would want to add value as opposed to duplicating efforts to the existing centers. And we do so by doing diligence. We are a group of scientists and engineers where we can vet technology and look at technology very carefully, so we can do the due diligence. As an NGO, we are neutral conveners of our stakeholders. And our founders have provided us with a modest war chest with which we have flexible and nimble funds that we hope to co-fund in first-of-a-kind projects. And then with MPA as our partner, we will have early involvement of regulators and policymakers. And with that, we can contextualize information for our stakeholders across value chains, including coming up with common taxonomy. Within the local ecosystem in Singapore, our partners are, in addition to MPA, is of course SMI, the Singapore Maritime Institute. whereas the Singapore Maritime Institute focuses on enabling fundamental research and technology development within local institutes and higher learning and research institutes. We're focused on facilitating the development of new solutions with global partners to bring the technologies to scale. So in some sense, the work and the projects that are funded by SMI feeds into how we're thinking and how we can move forward strategically. We're guided by this technology readiness level framework that I'm showing in orange here. And if you're familiar, so one is academic research, very fundamental, and as you progress up that ladder, you go to increasingly more developed or closer towards commercialization. And so we see ourselves being higher up in the technology readiness level. So I'm a chemical engineer by training, and I'm proud to work with this group that is now our projects team. My partner in crime is Dr. Sanjay Kutan, who's the CTO of GCMD. He was previously the executive director of Singapore Maritime Institute, and so knows the ecosystem very well. And in his prior stints in McKinsey, in ExxonMobil, and in DNV, he has a purview of what's going on globally as well. In Kyung Ko will be joining us November 1. He's currently the Assistant Director of the Maritime Energy and Sustainable Development Center of Excellence at NTU. And in that respect, he spent more than 15 years working on decarbonization projects and brings that expertise to GCMD. Wei Jie Lau is joining us for 2 years from MPA. And at MPA, he was coordinating and leading decarbonization projects, most recently the electrification of hovercraft. And he's been instrumental in the founding of GCMD, and he saw, along with others, going from construct to reality of GCMD. And then finally, we have Tina Ang, who comes to us from ExxonMobil. So ExxonMobil is part of the supply chain for maritime, so she brings that perspective and is going to help us manage our stakeholders and partners. So our goals is really to help the industry meet or exceed the IMO goals of 2030 and 2050. And we're going to do so by doing a number of different things, by accelerating the deployment of scalable low-carbon technologies across the ecosystem, and we're doing this by validating the technical and commercial feasibility. And so this is bringing together solution adopters and solution providers. We'd like to lower the adoption barrier for these kinds of solutions by closing the gap in infrastructure, safety, operations, and financing. So this is another group of stakeholders that we're talking about, including government agencies, but also underwriters, standards developers, financiers. And then we can act as a center of gravity for catalyzing and facilitating interactions along the ecosystem and along the supply chain, global connections, and then finally to disseminate information and tools that are related to maritime decarbonization. So there are lots of decarbonization solutions out there. This is a list that's available at the IMO. And you can see that they're split into technical and operational measures, alternative fuels, market-based solutions. Some are at scale, and you can deploy them today. Some are still under development. So the question when we came together as a group at GCMD in looking at this list is, well, where do we start? So the way we've chosen to prioritize where we should put our resources and our effort is by looking at 2 different criteria. One is the technology and commercial maturity of these different solutions. And then the other is its impact, so measuring emissions reduction potential. So let me take you through how we're thinking about this. So this is the technology and commercial maturity framework that we're using to evaluate the kinds of projects that we'd like to participate in. So in the green is the technology readiness level ladder that you saw earlier on. And again, you start from TRL 1, 2, that's in the academic labs, and you progress upwards. In addition to technology readiness, we're talking about commercializability. So we're looking at commercial readiness index as well. And so that's charted in blue to show you the CRI index. And in numerous conversations with our stakeholders, we determined that our sweet spot is really what's highlighted. So it's in TRL 7 and above, and CRI 2 and 3. And so we've decided our investment thesis is to put our effort into looking at feasibility and assessment studies to enable TRL 7 and higher projects and CRL 2 and 3 higher projects, and also to look at pilot trials and projects that are higher than TRL 6 and CRI 1. In terms of looking at emissions reduction potential, we look to our friends at MESD, and this is funded by SMI, so we've already started collaborating with institutes of higher learning here. And so in our conversations, it's important to look at these emissions reduction potential. So on the y-axis are these different technologies and solution, and plotted on the x-axis is the greenhouse emissions reduction potential. So 0 means that you're not improving the carbon emissions profile, and 100% means you completely eliminated carbon emissions. And so you can see with these different technologies, their abatement potential vary by quite a bit. So for slow steaming, for example, that's quite effective with greenhouse gas reduction potential more than, it can range, but it can be up to 50%. But that requires the whole industry to support this effort, right? So that no company is disadvantaged. In any case, you can look across these, and we took several notes in looking across these. Many of the technologies that are out there give us reduction potentials. They're on the order of teens, okay? And then the other note that we took away from this chart is that you can't combine these things easily, meaning that they're not necessarily additive. So for example, if you do slow steaming or if you tune your engine, you may not get high enough the temperature so that you can engage in waste heat management. And then last but not least is the fact that if you're going to employ these different technical and operational measures, they alone are not sufficient for you to actually reach the 2050 goals of IMO. And it's for that reason that we need to look at alternative fuels, because that bar goes from 0 to 100%. So zero carbon fuels will allow you to get to the 100% level. So based on those triangulation, looking at the abatement potential, and then looking at the commercial readiness and the technology readiness level, we came up with a short list of where we should immediately focus our attention. So it shouldn't be any surprise that alternative fuels is up on top. And this is the entire list of alternative fuels, including biofuels, both from crops as well as from bugs, right? So that includes the biomethane and biomethanol. It also includes e-fuels, so using renewable electricity and renewable electrons to generate hydrogen and ammonia, and then finally electrification. In the alternative energy converters, we're interested in dual fuel internal combustion engines because they provide the modularity and the flexibility in moving forward because the fuel solution is uncertain. And we're also interested in fuel cells that can convert chemical energy to electrical energy. In technical and operational measures, we're guided by the abatement potential, and we think wind power is interesting, air lubrication is interesting, and my personal favorite is carbon capture and storage, because if you read any of the energy systems report, and those that we've conducted at Princeton says the same, we need negative emissions technology in order to reach the Paris goals. So carbon capture is one of those. Just to drill down a little bit, what I'm sharing here is the marine fuel value chain. And so you can see that the value chain is actually quite complex and quite intertwined, and it involves quite a few stakeholders, from the production of the fuels to distribution and storage to bunkering and to application. So down below, you can see if we had fuels, there's a production plant, and then one needs to worry about the transfer to storage terminals, and then there are different modes of transferring this fuel, either by truck or bunker barge, to the vessels themselves. And so up top, government is involved, regulations is involved, and also higher learning institutes are involved in providing the research to support all the development that goes on. So in our conversations with all the stakeholders, it quickly became clear to us that this is an area that we should focus on. And a gap that we've identified is understanding the safety and operations of transporting such fuels. And so 2 months in, I'm very, very proud to announce that we're issuing our first invitation for proposal today. And the invitation is around proposals to define the safety and operation envelopes to enable ammonia bunkering pilot and demonstration in Singapore. Before I tell you about the scope of this invitation call, I thought I would justify why ammonia. And so the chemical engineer in me says that we should look at some chemical reaction. And so in justifying why ammonia is important, we can just look at ammonia production for now. And if you look at ammonia production, green ammonia production, it turns out that you need 3 equivalents of green hydrogen to produce 2 equivalents of green ammonia. And if you look at any carbon-containing fuels, methanol as an example, the hydrogenation of carbon dioxide to produce methanol also requires 3 equivalents of hydrogen, but it produces 1 equivalent of methanol. So from a production efficiency perspective, you get more ammonia per unit input of hydrogen versus methanol. Couple that with the fact that methanol is only 20% more energy dense than ammonia. From a scale of production perspective, ammonia is actually more efficient to produce. By no means am I saying ammonia is the solution. To the contrary, we believe that we require a portfolio of solutions to think about decarbonization. This is to justify why we're working on ammonia as our first study. And if you look across the supply chain, there are various ammonia projects, including the development of a first engine that's slated to be showcased in 2023, and then ships that come 2 years later. And there are also projects on looking at storage terminals. Where I believe we can add value is where the orange arrows are, is thinking about how you move the molecules safely from one spot to another. And hence the study that I've just mentioned earlier on. In thinking about ammonia, we can build on what's already known. Ammonia is a chemical that's being shipped around the world for fertilizers and precursors as other things. And so ammonia as a cargo is already, its safety and operations envelope is already known. So we can build on top of that. And here we've again spoken to our friends at MBSD. And by the way, Dr. Liu Ming is giving a presentation at the SMI Forum next week. So if you're interested in this aspect of the work, I would encourage you to see his presentation. So in terms of ammonia as a cargo fuel, lots is known. And so we need to think about what are the added things that we need to know for ammonia as a bunker fuel. So if we go down the list, the important things are highlighted in bold here. What the most important, I would say, along this list would be looking at the transfer frequency. So in using ammonia as a cargo, the transfer frequency could be low. But if we use ammonia as a bunker, one can imagine that the transfer frequency can be quite high. So specs are needed to ensure safety, safe transferring and safe operations of ammonia. So we can build on what's known for using ammonia as a cargo to build on using ammonia as a bunker. So in building up this invitation for proposal, we've identified prospective industry partners, and these come from these various stakeholders that are highlighted in blue here. We've spoken to fuel suppliers, fuel producers, bunker suppliers, port operators, vessel owners, and of course, institutes of higher learning. We believe the respondents to our proposal would be classification societies. They're uniquely enabled to be able to take this information, take the proprietary information, and put them together so that they can come up with a safety and operations envelope for looking at ammonia as a bunkering fuel. So the scope of the study is as follows, and there are 6 of them. One is to identify and make recommendations to address regulatory gaps. And so this is really on the safety side of things and understanding the hazard nature of ammonia. And then 2 is to recommend no more than 2 sites for bunkering ammonia. Another scope is to draft the technical guidelines and procedures because bunkering ammonia could be very different. Looking at ammonia as a chemical, the infrastructure is fixed, is firm. Whereas bunkering, we need to be more modular and we need to be more flexible. There are different configurations that need to be considered. So understanding and specifying those would be important. Generating CapEx model for what an ammonia bunkering infrastructure could look like. And then developing competency for operators. What are the standards of operations and bunkering operations? And then finally, validating these findings with industry stakeholders. So the proposal deadline is December, and we will review the proposals that come in so that we can commence a study at the beginning of 2022. And the idea is to complete the study within a year. We will facilitate discussion with relevant regulatory bodies, and this report then will support regulatory sandboxing and pave the way for an ammonia bunkering project that will happen in Singapore. So these are the committed partners that we've spoken with, and you can see that they vary across the supply chain. There are few producers that we're speaking to still, but from fuel storage terminal operations down to shipyards, you can see those who have expressed interest in becoming a partner. And so becoming a partner here means signing an NDA and being able to share proprietary information that can guide the study and how we proceed. So we're open and we welcome your participation. So in addition to those partners that we've identified, we'll set up an industry consultation and alignment panel, which we call ICAP, so that they can provide information and recommendations to this study. If you're interested in participating, I would encourage you to scan the QR code or come see me or through LinkedIn, find one of us, and we're happy to get you involved in the study. So with that, we're going to continue working. We're going to identify studies that can address these gaps in moving things forward. We're going to invest in projects to support trials and solutions with significant abatement potential. So with that, I'll conclude, and these are our coordinates, and happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof Lynn Loo. Can we give her a round of applause, please? If you may, can we just take a few more minutes of your time to be seated to take on some questions that were coming in through Pigeonhole? There was a very technical and in-depth presentation that we just went through with Prof Lynn. Thank you so much for joining us here on stage for kicking off today's SRS Forum. And of course, right now, it's time to see what questions will come our way. Ladies and gentlemen, as Prof Lynn is seated next to me, I'm going to ask you if you have any questions coming in using our Pigeonhole platform. So do me a favor right now, if you are thinking about some key things that you've learned from listening to Prof Lynn, I'd like you to key in your questions using our Pigeonhole forum. You can visit us at our forum website that you see on your screen right now. For my friends online with us, watching virtually, please send in your questions and let us know if you're watching from home. Thank you very much. Oh, okay, we've got a question coming in already. We've got some votes for this to be answered first from you. So, Prof, you mentioned collaboration across energy value chain, and this usually cuts across various industries. So, are you able to share some thoughts on possible areas of collaboration with other transport sectors?
Yeah, I think collaboration is so key because the problem is such a monumental one. And so I can give you a couple of examples. One, up the supply chain. So we think about energy companies and energy producers. Today, we're completely reliant on fossil fuels. And so it's important to partner with energy producing companies, and today it's oil and gas companies, to think about how we can decarbonize. Their scope 3 emissions is our scope 1 emissions because we're burning their fossil fuels. So in that sense, I think we're completely aligned in the decarbonization agenda. And so working with them would be important. The other aspect of why working with them is important is because the energy infrastructure took more than a century to build. Oh, yeah. And they have the experience, they have the wherewithal. And so if we identify what the next solution is, they play an important part in being able to push that solution forward. So that's upstream. And then in downstream, I'm intrigued when I look at the aviation industry. The aviation industry's carbon emissions is about 3% annually as well, so that looks like us. They are an industry whose carbon emissions is not within any national carbon budgets. They have an overarching entity at UN. We have the IMO, they have this International Civil Aviation Organization. Now, are there opportunities to work together because they face the same challenges as we do? In aviation, it's also trying to figure out the next fuel. And so they talk about sustainable aviation fuels. We talk about sustainable maritime fuels. Are there opportunities to work together so that we can co-invest in infrastructure, for example, or we can come together and try and push the development of certain fuels or the scaling up of certain fuels forward? So I think there are lots of opportunities to think across sectors.
Well, very well answered. I would really think it's about building the infrastructure for me, at least. Well, you also shared in one of the slides earlier as well some of the alternative energy resources that we can, of course, look forward to building towards. Thank you for the excellent question coming through. And then I think following up to that question, this is one of a question coming through Pigeonhole right now. So one of the challenges about alternative fuels is the bottleneck of supply sufficiency and logistic infrastructure. So what is GDMA's view, and whether or not those will be part of your scope of work?
Unlocking the supply chain, is that what it means?
Yes, thank you for this question as well, coming in highly voted too. Maybe we can start with GDMA's view of this.
Right, so the supply chain is complex, and I think all of us have a role to play. I think for us, what we're trying to do is to look at the supply chain carefully and identify where the gaps are. So this invitation for proposal that we've just announced today is a good example of that. We're leveraging what others have done in the ecosystem. We don't want to duplicate efforts. We're identifying where the holes are, and we're trying to plug the holes. And in doing so, we can move forward together. And so in the ammonia supply chain example, it's the transferring of molecule safely and the handling of molecules safely that needs to be articulated. And that's why the scope of the proposal is so specific to that.
Thank you so much for that question coming in from Pigeonhole as well, and also answering a very wide base of the questions that we have here on the floor. And there are more questions coming in. Prof Lynn, are you able to take on one more? We're taking a master class from Prof Lynn at this moment in time. Maybe we can take this as the last question. Now, Prof Lynn, as we are all aware, there are also other decarbonization centers out there. So could you tell us more about how different GCMD is and how it complements the other centers around the world?
Absolutely. I mean, I think in my first two slides, I've tried to articulate that. So there are other like-minded organizations around the world, and interestingly, they were also formed within the last year or so. And this shows how important the agenda is in decarbonization. It also shows that collaboration is so important in order for us to move forward together. So these centers that you're referring to include the Maersk Mc-Kinney Møller Zero Carbon Shipping Center that's in Denmark, the Lloyd's Register Decarbonization Hub that's out of the UK. And I've tried to tell you how different we are in the sense that we're uniquely backed by a diverse group of founders. Yeah, this in itself is a testament of collaboration. Where Lloyd's Register Decarbonization Hub and the Maersk Mc-Kinney Møller Zero Carbon Center focus is on feasibility studies and on technology development projects. What we're hoping to do is to take cues from them and start collaborating with them to be able to put metal in the ground, metal on water, to conduct some pilot projects here and elsewhere to lower the barrier for adoption. So to push it up that TRL ladder that you saw earlier on.
And amazingly as well, in your very last slide, you were asking for collaborations too to come in. So of course, that's a good way to start and also to end. So if you do have any ideas to come on board, please, of course, remember the very last slide that you saw is for Prof Lynn as an appeal to you to, of course, collaborate together. With that, ladies and gentlemen, Prof Lynn's been such a great patient professor teaching us, of course, the framework of things. We're very grateful to learn new insights. Can we please offer Prof Lynn a big round of applause? Thank you.
Thank you.